The last time I talked to him, said Sam, I thought he was rather restless. But that may have been these communistic ways of running the town. I've never told this to a living soul, said Crummy, but sometimes Father frightens me. Not with his petting and so on. For I don't care twopence about that. But once or twice lately he's talked of death with such an extraordinary look on his face. Almost always he talks of death when he's been petting me, or has seemed especially fond of me, but not unhappily, mind you. It's rather as if... It's so hard to put it, Mr. Sam. As if there were another me, someone like me, only of course much more exciting down there in Hades. I've seen his eyes, Mr. Sam. You know how dark they are. Shine like funnels of black fire when he's been talking of death and holding me on his knee. It's getting gross. Were you surprised that I should see the Holy Grail? Asked Sam irrelevantly. I thought you were seeing it all the time, said Crummy quickly. He was looking at this strange, apocalyptic creature on the barn now, and he thought to himself that there was something about them that reminded him of Mr. Geard. In fact, it was easy for him to imagine that Mr. Geard's architect, after the mayor was dead, might carve a fifth evangelistic symbol for this new gospel. Sam even began to think of his own ichthus, the world fish. He left Crummy out at Miss Drew's drive gate, and waited there till he heard, by the sound of the opening and closing door, that she was safely in the house. In the confused waves of the exultant happiness which she, the crumb of the loaf, as he had called her, had given him, soaking up to him and interpreting in practical terms the meaning of his vision, Holy Sam had blundered even more grossly, more unpardonably, than he had ever done in his life. He had made a clumsy and awkward attempt to kiss Crummy. The girl had turned her head away, and he had only brushed her cheek. But the contact of her flesh, at the entrance to this damp and dark shrubbery of the Abbey House, chilled him to the bone, as if he had touched the other, that Cimmerian Crummy, in the realms of death, of which her father was so enamored. As he turned away and crossed the road to enter his father's drive gate, Sam had the wit to realize that he had acted grossly in trying to kiss her. He had made the gesture in simple and spontaneous gratitude. She knew that as well as he did. Why, then, had she turned her head away? She turned it away so that the great love of her life, the secret ideal, capital I, of her girlhood, should not kiss her on the lips before he went in to her rival. Would she then have let him kiss her if there had been no question of Nell, but only the fact between them that he did not love her? Oh, still less so. Oh, far less so. For it might easily have been that the matter of rivalry would have led her to snatch fiercely, wickedly, maliciously at his proffered kiss. But nothing would have induced her to let him kiss her on the lips, she loving him and he not loving her, if that malice of rivalry hadn't entered. Crummy being what she was, it had not entered, and her lips remained virginal. And yet she had been kissed full upon the mouth, again and again, by many of the men who had been wont to caress her. Oh, deep beyond understanding is the curious secret. The whole being on the coldest, plainest, ugliest girl in the world resembles a sensitive plant whereof her reluctant lips are the leaves. Organized for receptivity by the whole structure, substance, and nerve responses of her identity, the electric yieldingness of a girl's body vibrates to the least pressure upon her mouth. Only the craftiest and subtlest of lovers know the preciousness, the tragic, unique, perilous preciousness, of that moment when, under the pressure of a kiss, her lips are parted. The two greatest realists that have ever lived, those superhuman delvers into the crook of a knee, or the dimple of a cheek, or the furrow of a brow, or the hollow of an eye socket, Dante and Leonardo da Vinci, were at once in finding in woman's lips the intellicia of all nature's secretest designs. A man's laugh. What a simple, nondescript ha-ha, ho-ho that sound is. Half a lion's roar and half an ass's bray, compared with the subtle waxing or waning, the broken ripple of the moon's reflection upon flowing water, of a woman's smile. To Dante, a maid's simple smile meant the latitude of the least little span of a thin eyelash between inexorable Acheron and the mystical circles of the Empyrean. And to Leonardo, the wavering beginning of a girl's smile carried, folded within its calyx, the blue veins of her thighs, the wild rose tips of her nipples, the arch of her instep, the silkiness of her flanks, the unfathomable recession of her final yielding to the pressure of desire. Some shamefaced and scattered inkling of all this hovered about Holy Sam's mind as he entered the familiar driveway of his father's home. Oh, he had been brutally selfish in all this whole business of his relations with the people of his life. But he would change it all now. He would take this new happiness of his and lavish it among them. Sam hurriedly opened the front door of the vicarage and plunged at once, as a dog into the odor of a familiar kennel, into the well-known smell of his birthplace. He heard the voices of Penny and Mr. Weatherwax raised loudly in the kitchen, and he felt glad that some lively interest of their own had prevented them from hearing his entrance. For a second he stood listening and hesitating. This way and that, dividing the swift mind, unable to decide whether to go into his father's first or run up to Nell. But it was not to his girl and his child that he must betake himself now and for the rest of his days. That was the mandate of the GRAIL. That was the dictate of her whose word, he as the face of a saint, had started him on his quest. As lightly as he could, but he was a heavy man, and the stairs creaked woefully, he rushed to the upper landing. He found himself actually forming upon his lips his cry to his love, I have come back to you forever. And as people do, outside a door that will reveal in a second a dear and familiar form, he hugged her to his heart and his mind with a very cling of reality. He knocked lightly twice, 2 little sharp, excited raps with his knuckles, and then without waiting for a reply flung upon the door. All was darkness. Faintly between the dark and drawn curtains he could see the dim shapes of the trees outside, outlined against a few pale stars. Empty was the great 4-posted bed of the Prince of Orange, cold and desolate in a deserted room. Nell, little Nell. His voice came back to him like the voice of someone who speaks at a place of the dead. With the first sickening catch of his heart, he thought to himself, she's taken him down to supper with father. Leaving the door of the big, empty room wide open, he rushed out upon the landing and ran down the stairs. He opened the dining room door. Pallid in the darkness shone the white tablecloth, laid for their evening meal. It made him think of a cloth upon an altar when they have put out the candles. Instinctively delaying, because of something ice-cold gathering about his heart, he plunged into the museum. He opened the drawing-room door. Doors, 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 always doors. And only emptiness within. With the musty smell of the fireless drawing room, that room where he had held Nell to his heart on the morning he's decided to go away, there smote upon his strange-up consciousness a sharp, quick death odor. The sense of the dying woman's body, from which Dr. Fell had torn him into this bitter life 26 years ago. Well, he must have made the plunge. Hearing still the voices of Penny and the gardener from the rear of the house, and the noise of chairs being pushed violently about. They're both drunk, he thought. He opened the museum door and went in. The lamp was untrimmed and smoking. The place seemed foul with lamp soot, but the room was at any rate was not empty. In his accustomed wicker chair sat his father. But to the son's surprise, for Sam had never known him do such a thing before, Matt Decker had pulled his chair close up to the fire, and he was in the act, apparently, of making the brightest blaze he could, for his big hands were fumbling at the grate, and the flames were rising high from the wood he had been piling on, and it looked as if, now that his great solar enemy had done his worst to him, he was making a lonely, sullen, Promethean gesture in defiance of all those cruel gods. Sam closed the door behind him. For the first time in his life, he did not give even a glance at the aquarium. "What is it, Father? Where is she? What has happened?" But even while he was asking these questions, his heart knew perfectly well, for he remembered what Angela had told him, and he recalled that letter with the foreign stamp. Matt Decker raised his head from the flames, which were throwing all the indents and wrinkles and corrugations of his ruddy face into startling prominence. He spoke no word, however. All he did was to make a gesture with his hands towards the table. Sam went to the table and turned down the smoking lamp. There, between the lamp and the aquarium, lay a folded scrap. A paper with "For Sam" written on it in pencil. He read it, standing by the lamp, while his father went on selecting the most inflammable bits of wood from the woodbox, at each increase in the heat of the blaze giving his chair a jerk still nearer. The penciled scrawl was of some length, but it was evidently traced in a great hurry. Nell's hand, however, was so schoolgirlish that Sam had no difficulty in making out the words. "Sam, my darling Sam, I shall always love you best of all. Whatever happens to me, whatever anyone says or does, you'll always be my one great love. But he came and made me go back with him. She's been gone a long time, gone to Russia, he says. He doesn't like her anymore. Will and I spoke freely of everything before I would let him take me away. He says he always knew the child was yours, but he says he loves it for my sake and always will. And this is true, Sam. And I think baby loves him more than either his father or mother. Will has no anger against you, and I have forgiven him about her. Oh, Sam, never, never, never will I forget you. Later," she had crossed out the word later and written soon, "we must see each other again. We've got used to seeing each other in your way, haven't we? But Will was so unhappy, Sam. He said he'd go to Africa if I didn't come back. I was sad, and your father was making himself miserable about us, so I know it's the best thing. You'll come back now, Sam, won't you? Now that I'm gone, and live with him again? My arms are tight round my Sam's neck, and always will be. Your Nell. P.S. I hadn't time to tidy up my room. Oh, Sam, I can't help it, but I love you. I love you." He folded the letter up and stood motionless for a while, staring at the aquarium but seeing nothing except Nell's face. Then he moved across to his father and laid his hand on his shoulder. The older man turned around fiercely upon him, and Sam never forgot the gleam of anger, blind, bewildered, tragic anger, in his deep-set gray eyes. "Go!" he cried hoarsely. "Get out of here. Go back to your clay hauling. When I want your pity, I'll send for you." It was clear that the man's whole mind was completely obsessed and present by his own frustrated passion. His emotions had smoldered and smoldered till they had become like a lump of darkly burning peat, self-scorched, self-felt, self-consumed. Sam sighed heavily and went to the door. He still held Nell's letter tightly crumpled up in his hand. "Don't set the chimney on fire, Father," he called back as he went out. He walked down the long dark passage and went into the kitchen. Here there were many signs of some recent riotous scene, but the two old cronies were at peace again, facing each other by the stove, each with a bowl of the famous gorlus on their knees. They were too fuddled to rise from their chairs at Sam's entrance. "Why, Penny," he said, "I thought you never drank with Mr. Weatherwax." "Her bain't drinking with I. Her be hearing a zing me zongs." And the enormous countenance of the gardener, radiant with tipsy contentment, burst into his favourite ditty, which I will now sing to you. "The miller, the maltster, the devil, and I had a heifer, had a filly, had a ding-dong. By now in a grass-green glade she do lie. Pass along, boys, pass along." But Penny Pitches looked dreamily from one to the other. "Best for 'em to sing," she muttered brokenly. "Let 'em sing, Master Sam. Let us all zing and ding. I'd a never drank with he if thick bare-faced baggage hadn't called her names to me vase when I gave she a piece of my mind. Yes, you may work your chin at me as much as thee likes, me lad. Her's gone back where her wasn't to sleep single no more. The baggage be all the same. Master Zoyland had only to ring bell and call Nell, and up she picks her baby, and pop goes the weasel. I did me best for to hold she for ye, Mr. Sam, but her only called I names, and Master Zoyland cursed I for a wold bitch." Seeing that there was nothing better than this to be got tonight out of his foster mother, and too sick at the heart to be able to endure another stave of ding-dong, Sam wearily went on his way. Slowly, very slowly, as he returned through the crowded Sunday night streets of Manor House Road, past the calm, familiar tower of St. John's, the influence of his vision, capital V, came back a little, and he had regained enough acquiescence in the decree of destiny by the time he reached his top floor to receive a certain homely comfort from the wild, extravagant pleasure with which the black spaniel, emerging from beneath his bed, leaped up to lick his hands. His conscious mind was sad, even to the verge of a sort of inert despair, from this loss of Nell at the very moment when he was ready to live with her. But below his conscious mind, stirring still in the depths of his being, was the feeling, "I can endure whatever fate came due to me, for I have seen the GRAIL." And that's the end of that chapter. That's the GRAIL. Now we're on the penultimate chapter of the book, The Iron Bar. We'll start that chapter next week. Or not next week, tomorrow. Till next time, see you in Glastonbury. Cheers.